The scanner on my shuttle had been broken for 6 months, and I had not bothered to fix it. That was how I found the auction listing. Not through any sophisticated search, not through a broker or a tip from a friend, but because the Galactic Trade Council had sent a mass notification to every registered independent operator in the sector, and I had nothing better to do at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, except read my messages and drink bad instant coffee. Lot 7 Gamma, Keth Varan Orbital Transit Hub. Status: derelict. Location: outer rim of the Carrion Expanse, designated uninhabited corridor. Last operational record: 312 galactic standard years prior. Reserve bid: 9,000 credits. I almost scrolled past it. 9,000 credits was more than I had spent on anything since the divorce. It was more than my shuttle was worth. It was more than the broken scanner would cost to fix if I ever decided to bother. But I kept reading. The station was described as a Class 7 orbital complex. 47 docking bays. Functional reactor cores. Dormant but intact. Pressurized interior. 83% of compartments still holding atmosphere. Artificial gravity systems. Operational. Total interior surface area: 640,000 square meters. 640,000 square meters. For 9,000 credits. I put the coffee down. My name is Elliot Varn. I am 38 years old. I spent 11 years working as a senior logistics engineer for Halcourt Freight Solutions, a mid-tier cargo company that serviced 12-star systems and paid me just enough to believe I was stable. Then Halcourt was absorbed by a larger corporation. My position was eliminated. My marriage ended 4 months later because my former wife said, fairly, I think, that I had turned into a person who only knew how to function when given a problem to solve, and I had become a problem she no longer wanted to solve, and I moved into my shuttle and started taking short-haul contracts to pass the time. That was 14 months ago. I had been drifting since then, not dramatically, not in any way that made a good story, just quietly, slowly drifting, taking jobs, finishing them, sleeping in the shuttle, waking up, doing it again. The stars outside the cockpit window had started to look less like destinations and more like ceiling tiles. I needed somewhere to stop. Not temporarily, not a port or a station I was passing through. Somewhere that was mine. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that no one would bother looking for me, because no one would have any reason to come there at all. 640,000 square meters of space for 9,000 credits. I registered for the auction at 2:14 in the morning and went to sleep on the co-pilot seat with my jacket over my face. The auction was held remotely through the Galactic Trade Council's commercial relay system. I attended from the cockpit of my shuttle, parked at a fueling depot 3 systems away, eating a dry protein bar and watching the bidding interface load on my screen. The interface was old. The font was ugly. There were 47 lots listed for the session. Lots 1 through 6 sold quickly. 2 decommissioned cargo haulers, a mining rights package, a relay antenna array, a partially collapsed ice processing plant, and a set of navigational data packages for a corridor that had been rerouted 15 years ago. There was decent competition on each of them. Then came Lot 7 Gamma. The auctioneer was a Drelvan. I had worked with Drelvans before. Small, gray-skinned, large-eyed beings who were extraordinarily efficient and almost pathologically calm. This one was not calm. I could see him on the small video feed in the corner of my screen. His wide eyes kept moving to something off to the left, something the camera did not show. He cleared his throat twice before reading the listing. Lot 7 Gamma, he said. Keth Varan Orbital Transit Hub. Class 7 Complex. Carrion Expanse Outer Corridor. Reserve at 9,000 credits. Bidding is open. Silence. I waited. I assumed someone would jump in. A salvage company. A development firm. A speculator. Someone. Nobody did. The Drelvan's eyes went left again. His fingers tightened on the edge of his desk. He cleared his throat a third time. Bidding remains open on Lot 7 Gamma, he said. 9,000 credits. Any registered participants wishing to bid, please enter your offer now. I typed 9,000 and hit confirm. Bid received, the Drelvan said. He paused. He looked left again. Longer this time. Are there any additional bids on Lot 7 Gamma? Nothing. The countdown timer ran to 0. Lot 7 Gamma, Keth Varan Orbital Transit Hub, is sold to registered participant, Elliot Varn, Sol System Registry, for 9,000 credits. The Drelvan closed the lot file and moved on to Lot 8, without looking at the camera once. I stared at my screen. I owned a space station. I sat there for a full minute without moving. Then I ate the rest of my protein bar. Then I pulled up the navigation charts for the Carrion Expanse and started plotting a course. It took me 9 days to reach the coordinates listed in the sale documents. The Carrion Expanse was not a popular route. The star density in the region was low. The trade lanes had been rerouted decades ago, and there was nothing out here that anyone wanted. The corridor was quiet in the way that open space is quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but empty, like a room that no one had been in for a very long time. I came out of my last jump and saw it. Keth Varan was not what I expected. I had expected something broken, something that looked its age. I had pictured cracked hull plating and dark windows, and the general exhaustion of a thing that had been left alone too long. What I saw was enormous. The station stretched across my cockpit view like a small city suspended in the dark. It was built in a great ring structure. Multiple connected rings, actually, one inside the other, with a central hub that rose up from the middle like the tower of an ancient cathedral. The hull was dark metal, deep bronze and black, covered in carved geometric patterns that caught the distant starlight and scattered it in thin lines across the surface. It was 300 years old, and it looked like something that had been built to last forever. I docked at the nearest accessible bay. The airlock cycled slowly, with the deep mechanical groan of systems waking from a long sleep. The pressure equalized. The inner door opened. The corridor inside was wide enough to drive 2 freight trucks side by side. The ceiling was 4 stories above my head. The walls were covered in the same carved geometric script as the exterior, rows and rows of alien characters that I did not recognize, in at least 6 different styles, some overlapping others. The floor was a dark material, smooth and unscratched, that reflected the faint emergency lighting running along the base of the walls. It did not smell like decay. It smelled like cold metal and something faintly dry, like old paper, like a library. I walked for 20 minutes without seeing an end to the corridor. I found a side room, small, maybe 4 meters by 5 meters, with a circular viewport looking out into open space. There was a low shelf built into one wall, and a recessed alcove that might have been designed for sleeping. I put my bag down on the shelf. I went back to the shuttle, got my coffee maker, my spare power cell, and my toolkit. I ran a cable from the nearest live power conduit to the room. The lights came on. Real lights, warm and steady, not just the emergency strips. I set up the coffee maker on the shelf next to my bag. I sat down on the floor with my back against the wall and looked out the viewport at the stars. It was quiet, completely, absolutely quiet. No engine noise, no port chatter on the radio, no voices, just the faint hum of the station's sleeping systems, and the stars outside the glass and me. For the first time in 14 months, I breathed out completely. I sat there for a long time, long enough that the coffee I had made went cold, long enough that the stars outside shifted slightly as the station made its slow, patient rotation, long enough that I started to think, actually think, clearly, without the static of everything falling apart, about what I was going to do next. I was thinking about whether to set up my cot in the alcove or bring in the folding mattress from the shuttle when the long-range scanner built into the corridor panel, which I had not turned on, which I had not touched, activated on its own. The alert tone was a single long note, low and resonant, like a bell struck in a very large room. I got up and looked at the panel. The readout was in the same alien script as the walls. I could not read it, but I did not need to read it, because through the viewport I could see it. A ship had come out of faster-than-light travel directly above the station. It was not small. It was not a shuttle or a scout or a freighter. It was a vessel so large that it blocked out a quarter of the starfield through my little circular window. A dark, angular craft, all sharp geometry and heavy plating, moving with the slow, certain confidence of something that has never needed to hurry, because nothing has ever been able to stop it. My long-range communicator crackled. Then a voice came through. It was deep, layered, like 2 voices speaking at the same pitch, with a half-second difference between them. This is Sovereign Vessel Ankara, operating under direct authority of the Voth High Council. You have been detected aboard Keth Varan, a site of protected Voth heritage. This station is sacred property under the Voth Isolation Seal, established 309 galactic standard years ago. You are not authorized to be here. Identify yourself immediately, and prepare to submit to reclamation procedures. I stood at my viewport looking up at the ship for a long moment. Then I went and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and sat back down on the floor. They would want an answer. I would give them one. But I was going to finish my coffee first, because I had just bought this place, and I had not had a single quiet moment in it yet, and whatever was about to happen next, I suspected it was going to take a very long time to resolve, and I was not going to face it uncaffeinated. Outside, the massive ship held its position, and waited. I looked at the purchase receipt still open on my screen. 9,000 credits, 1 Elliot Varn, Sol System Registry, Lot 7 Gamma, fully transferred, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt stubborn. The communicator crackled again, waiting for my response. I picked it up. "This is Elliot Varn," I said. "I own this station. I have the receipt. You're welcome to come aboard, but take your shoes off." There was a pause, a long one. Then the channel went quiet. I drank my coffee and waited. They did not take their shoes off. The first thing I noticed when the docking bay doors opened and the Voth boarding party came through was the sound. Not voices. They were not speaking yet. The sound was the floor. The station floor, which had been completely silent under my own boots for 9 days, rang with each step they took. Not loudly, but clearly. A low, resonant tone, like tapping on the side of a large metal drum, that rippled slightly down the corridor with every footfall. There were 6 of them. 5 were soldiers. I assumed soldiers because they wore plated armor that covered them from shoulder to ankle, and carried long-handled instruments that could have been tools or weapons or both. They were tall. The shortest one was nearly 2.5 meters. They were insectoid in structure. Bilateral symmetry. 2 arms, 2 legs. But the limbs were longer than a human's in proportion to the body, and the joints bent at slightly different angles, and their heads were narrow and angular with compound eyes that picked up the emergency lighting and held it in small fractured points, like broken mirrors. The 6th one was taller than the rest. She was not wearing the same armor. Hers was different, older looking, with more of the carved geometric script etched across the chest and shoulders. Her compound eyes were a darker shade, almost black, where the soldier's eyes were amber. She carried nothing. She did not need to. Everything about the way she moved said that carrying a weapon was something other people did because they needed the help. She stopped when she saw me. I was standing in the middle of the main corridor with a mug of coffee in one hand and the printed copy of my purchase receipt in the other. I had found the station's central lighting controls that morning and turned them all on, so the corridor was now fully lit for the first time in 300 years, and the carved script on the walls was glowing faintly, with some kind of bioluminescent material embedded in the grooves that I had not noticed in the emergency lighting. She looked at the walls. She looked at the lit corridor stretching away behind me. Then she looked at me. "You are the human," she said. Her voice was even, controlled, the double-layer quality I had heard on the communicator now present in person, one voice slightly behind the other, like an echo that happened too quickly. "I am a human," I said. "Specifically, I am Elliot Varn, and you are?" A pause, the kind of pause that suggested no one had asked her that question in a very long time, in a tone that expected an actual answer. "I am Commander Severith Khan, of the Voth Reclamation Authority," she said. "I hold rank of 3rd Talon under Admiral Vakan of the sovereign vessel Ankara. I am authorized to act on behalf of the Voth High Council in all matters pertaining to the recovery of protected Voth heritage sites." She let that land. Then, "You should not be here." "I agree that this is a somewhat unusual situation," I said. "Would you like to see the purchase documentation?" She did not move toward the receipt. She looked at it the way you might look at something a small child has proudly drawn that has no relation to the subject they claim to be drawing. "The sale of Keth Varan was not valid," she said. "This station was placed under a Voth isolation seal 309 years ago. It was not decommissioned. It was not abandoned. It was protected under the authority of the Voth High Council, and no party had the right to auction it." "The Galactic Trade Council disagrees," I said. "The Galactic Trade Council made an administrative error." "Possibly," I said. But I paid for it in good faith, and I have a legal receipt. And until someone with the authority to overturn a completed Galactic Trade Council transaction tells me otherwise, I own this station. I held the receipt out again. Would you like to see it? She looked at the receipt for a long moment. Then she looked at me. She had been doing that throughout our exchange. Looking at the receipt, looking at me, as if trying to decide which of us was more inexplicable. I got the impression that in her experience, when the Voth Reclamation Authority arrived somewhere and stated that something belonged to the Voth, the conversation ended there. Not because of threats or force necessarily, just because no one had ever felt the need to continue it. You are not afraid, she said. It was not a question. It was the observation of someone who had encountered an unexpected variable. I'm a little nervous, I said honestly, but I've had a rough couple of years and I spent everything I had left on this place, so I'm also not really in a position to just leave. Would you like coffee? I have a pot on. Another pause, longer this time. What is coffee? She asked. It's a drink, from Earth. Hot water passed through roasted ground seeds. It's bitter. Some people find it unpleasant. Most people I know can't function without it. She looked at the mug. Something shifted slightly in the arrangement of her angular face. Not an expression I could read yet, but a change of some kind. No, she said. I do not want coffee. Suit yourself, I said. What happens now? Now, she said, I contact the Voth High Council and request clarification on the legal standing of the Galactic Trade Council sale. Until I have that clarification, you will remain here under observation. I was planning to remain here regardless, I said. So that works for me? She looked at me again. The fractured points of light in her compound eyes did not move, but something around them did. You are very calm for a human alone, on a station surrounded by a Vath sovereign vessel, she said. You haven't done anything threatening, I pointed out. You've boarded, identified yourself, and told me there might be a legal dispute. That's actually pretty reasonable. I've had landlords who handled things worse. She did not respond to that. She turned to the 5 soldiers behind her, said something in a language that sounded like very fast percussion, and 2 of them moved off down the corridor to the right. The other 3 took up positions near the docking bay entrance. Then she turned back to me. I will need to examine the station, she said. Feel free, I said. I'll warn you, I've only turned the lights on in this section. The rest of it is still on emergency power. I haven't had time to explore it all myself. I paused. Actually, if you know the layout, that would be helpful. The schematics in the sale documentation were partial. She stared at me. You are asking me to help you navigate a station that I am attempting to reclaim from you. I'm asking you to help me navigate a station that we both have an interest in not breaking anything inside, I said, while the legal question gets sorted out. There was a very long silence. One of the soldiers near the docking bay made a sound. I could not tell if it was a cough or a laugh. Sevrith Khan turned and said something short and sharp to the soldiers. The sound stopped. Then she turned back to me. The central hub, she said, contains the primary control systems. The ring corridors each serve different functions. The outer ring was commercial docking. The second ring was residential. The inner ring was administrative. The central hub held the council chamber. Council chamber? Keth Varan was not merely a transit hub, she said. Her tone shifted, still controlled, but with something underneath it now that had not been there before. Something careful, like someone picking up an object they have not touched in a long time and are not sure they should be holding. It was the seat of the Carrion Convergence, 17 civilizations. They met here every 10 galactic standard years to settle disputes, establish trade agreements, and maintain the peace of the entire sector. For 400 years, this station was the reason there was no major war in the expanse. I looked at the walls, at the carved script in 6 different styles. These are all different languages, I said. 17, she said. 1 for each founding member of the Convergence. Every agreement, every law, every record of every meeting held in this station is inscribed on these walls. She paused. The lower corridors contain 390 years of galactic history. I was quiet for a moment. So what happened? I asked. Why did it close? Her posture changed. Not much, but enough. A dispute, she said, between the Voth noble houses, over the right to preside over the convergence sessions. The High Council determined that it was better to seal the station than to allow it to operate under conditions of internal Voth disagreement. They intended the seal to last 30 years. She paused again. The dispute was not resolved. For 309 years. Yes. I drank the rest of my coffee. It was cold. So you locked up one of the most important peace stations in the sector, I said, because two Voth houses couldn't agree on who got to sit at the head of the table. She did not answer. And in 309 years, I said, no one thought to just reopen it? The legal and political structures surrounding the seal are complex, she said. I'm sure they are, I said. But here's the thing, Commander. Right now, I own it. And I'm going to make myself a fresh cup of coffee. And if the Galactic Trade Council confirms my purchase is valid, which I believe it will, then we are going to have to figure out what to do next. I looked at the carved walls, all 6 scripts glowing faintly in the restored light, because I did not buy this place to start a war. I bought it because I wanted somewhere quiet, and from what you're telling me, it used to be somewhere important. Those are 2 very different things, and I need to think about what that means. Severith Khan was quiet for a long moment. One of the soldiers shifted his weight behind her. Outside, through the thick hull of the station, I could feel the faint presence of the sovereign vessel Ankara holding its position, waiting. You are a very strange human, she said. I've been told, I said. Coffee is on the left if you change your mind. I went to refill my mug. The Galactic Trade Council's response came in 31 hours. I was in the middle of replacing a broken atmospheric seal on a corridor junction when my communicator buzzed. The message was formal, dense with legal language, and took me 3 readings to parse fully. The summary was this. The Voth High Council had not filed a temporary heritage seal notification with the Galactic Trade Council at the time of the isolation seal's implementation. Under GTC Property Code, Article 14, Section 3, failure to file a heritage notification within 50 galactic standard years of placing a permanent or indefinite hold on an asset allowed the GTC to reclassify that asset as abandoned. Article 9 of the same code specified that abandoned assets of non-critical classification could be auctioned to registered operators after a minimum dormancy period of 100 years. Keth Varan had been dormant for 309. The sale was valid. The station belonged to me. I read the message twice more. Then I sent a copy to Severith Khan's communicator frequency, which she had given me the previous day. I assumed so she could send me orders to leave. Her response came back in 4 minutes. It was a single line. This is not over. I wrote back, I know, but it gives us something to work with. Come have coffee. She did not respond to that. But 40 minutes later, she appeared at the door of the room I had been using as a base of operations. She looked at the coffee maker. She looked at me. She looked at the coffee maker again. It smells strange, she said. It smells like coffee, I said. Here. I poured a mug and set it on the shelf where she could reach it if she chose to. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she stepped in, picked up the mug and held it. She did not drink it. She just held it. The High Council is furious, she said. I imagine they are. They are demanding that I recover the station immediately. The GTC says that's not legal without a court order from the Interspecies Civil Claims Panel, I said, which takes, according to my research this morning, an average of 2 to 4 galactic standard years to convene. She looked at me. The black compound eyes were unreadable but steady. You researched this, she said. I spent 11 years in logistics, I said. I know how to find the rule that helps me. She was quiet. Then, carefully, she raised the mug and took a small sip of coffee. Her face did not change. The expression, or the Voth equivalent of one, stayed exactly as it had been, but she did not put the mug down. It is extremely bitter, she said. Yes, I agreed. And yet, she said, and paused as if searching for the right word. It is also present. It makes itself known. That's coffee, I said. She took another sip. Outside, the sovereign vessel Ankara held its position above the station it had come to reclaim, and its commander stood in a small room on the station's second ring, drinking coffee with the human who had legally purchased it for 9,000 credits, and neither of them said anything for a while because there was, for the moment, nothing left to say. I looked out the viewport at the stars. She looked at the carved script on the wall. and the station, which had been dark and silent for 309 years, hummed quietly around us, as if it were glad something was finally happening. I did not intend to fix anything. That needs to be stated clearly because later, when people told the story, it always came out sounding as though I had arrived at Kethvaran with a plan, some grand design, some vision of what the station could become. That was not true. I arrived with a toolkit, a coffee maker, a folding mattress, and a very strong desire to not talk to anyone for a while. What happened next was not a plan. It was a series of small, practical decisions made by someone who could not stand to be in the same room as a problem without trying to fix it. The dripping started on the 4th day after Sevrith Khan's boarding party arrived. It was not dramatic dripping. It was not a flood or a rupture or anything that endangered the station. It was a slow, rhythmic tick-tick-tick from somewhere in the ceiling of the second ring corridor, a coolant microvalve that had been seeping for possibly decades. In the silence of the station, with the Voth soldiers patrolling at a respectful distance, and Sevrith Khan somewhere in the central hub reviewing records, it was the loudest thing in the universe. I found the valve panel, opened it, identified the problem in about 4 minutes, and fixed it with a replacement seal from my toolkit, standard maintenance, the kind of thing I had done 100 times on freight platforms and cargo haulers and every other piece of aging infrastructure I had ever been paid to keep running. While I had the panel open, I noticed the atmospheric regulator behind the valve was running at 62% efficiency. I adjusted it. While I was adjusting it, I noticed the power relay 3 junctions down was misaligned. Not failing, but not optimal either. I realigned it. I spent 6 hours in that corridor section doing maintenance. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because it needed to be done urgently. Because it needed to be done and I knew how to do it. And the alternative was sitting in my room listening to the dripping. The next morning I found a section of docking bay 7, where the magnetic clamp array was offline. I traced the fault back to a power distribution hub, replaced 2 components from the spare parts I carried in the shuttle, and restored the clamps to full operation. While I was in the docking bay, I noticed the bay doors themselves could be manually cycled. The automatic systems were dormant, but the manual override was intact. I cycled them. They opened smoothly, with a sound like a deep breath being let out. Sevrith Khan found me there an hour later. She stopped in the doorway of docking bay 7 and looked at the fully operational magnetic clamps and the functioning bay doors. "You repaired this," she said. "The clamp array was offline," I said. "It was a simple fix. This bay has been non-functional for 300 years. The components were still good," I said. "They just needed realigning and a couple of replaced relays. Whoever built this station built it to last. The bones are solid. It's just been sitting idle." She was quiet for a moment. She walked slowly into the bay, her footsteps making that low, resonant tone against the floor. She ran her hand along the wall, not the carved script, but the structural hull beside it. Something in the gesture was different from how she had moved before, less like a commander conducting an inspection, and more like something I did not have a word for. "This was the first bay my ancestors docked in," she said quietly, "when the Voth first joined the Carrion Convergence, 470 years ago." She paused. "My family held this docking bay as a point of pride. We contributed to the Convergence for 2 centuries before the seal." I did not say anything to that. It seemed like the kind of thing that did not need a response. "You are making this more complicated," she said then, her voice returning to its usual controlled register. "I'm making the docking bay operational," I said. "How is that complicated?" "Because it is difficult to reclaim an abandoned ruin," she said. "It is significantly more difficult to reclaim a functioning station." She looked at me. "If you continue repairing systems, you will have made the legal case considerably harder for the Voth High Council." "I noticed that," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Is that why you are doing it?" "No," I said. "I'm doing it because the dripping was driving me insane. The fact that it helps my case is a bonus." For the first time since she had boarded, something changed in the precise geometry of Sevrith Khan's expression. It was small, a very slight adjustment around the eyes, a fractional shift in the set of her jaw. I could not have said with confidence that it was the Voth equivalent of a smile, but it was something. She left the docking bay without commenting further. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked through the station systematically. Not quickly, I was one person, but steadily. I restored atmospheric circulation to 4 additional ring sections. I repaired 3 power distribution nodes. I got the water reclamation system in the residential ring back to 70% capacity. I found the central heating grid and brought it up from emergency minimum to comfortable operational temperature, and the entire station seemed to exhale as the warmth spread through the corridors. Sevrith Khan watched all of this. She did not help, but she stopped looking at me with the particular combination of confusion and mild offense she had started with, and began looking at me with something more like wary attention. She asked questions about the repairs, about my methods, about the components I was using. I answered them. She told me, in return, what systems I was looking at and what they had been used for. Between the two of us, working around each other in the corridors of the station, we began to piece together a picture of what Kethvaran had once been. It had been extraordinary. There was no other word for it. The more I repaired and the more Sevrith Khan explained, the clearer it became that this station had been built with a care and a precision that was almost impossible to believe. Every system was redundant. Every component was serviceable. Every corridor was designed with enough width and ceiling height to accommodate the largest of the 17 founding species, and enough delicacy of proportion to make the smallest feel at home. The 17 scripts on the walls were not decoration. They were a complete record, an ongoing archive. Every decision and agreement and dispute and resolution carved into the stone of the place so that nothing could ever be lost. And the central hub. I got into the central hub on the 9th day, through a sequence of access panels that Sevrith Khan guided me through. The doors opened. Heavy, ceremonial doors, 3 meters tall, made of a black composite material that was warm to the touch, and we walked into the council chamber. It was round, a perfect circle. The ceiling was a dome, and the dome was transparent, or something very close to transparent, and through it, the stars of the Carrion expanse were visible in all directions, a full sphere of space surrounding the chamber. 17 seats were arranged in a circle beneath the dome, each one different, each one sized and shaped for a different body type, each one carved from a different material that I could not identify but that caught the starlight differently, so that the circle of seats glittered with 17 different qualities of reflected light. In the center of the circle was nothing, just open floor, smooth and unmarked. I stood there for a long time. They sat here, I said, all 17 of them. Every 10 years, Sevrith Khan said. She was standing near one of the seats, a tall, angular seat with a high carved back. She did not touch it. For 400 years. And now it's been empty for 300. Yes. I looked at the dome, at the stars. That's a waste, I said. She said nothing. Then, the next day, something happened that I had not anticipated. A ship requested docking permission. Not the Voth. A Drelvan merchant vessel. Small, quick, running a supply route along the outer expanse. The pilot had picked up the station's newly restored navigation beacon, which I had repaired without fully realizing what it was, and assumed the station was operational. She sent a standard docking request on the commercial frequency and asked about berthing rates. I stared at the request for a moment. Then I opened the channel. This is Kethvaran, I said, because what else was I going to call it? Docking Bay 7 is operational. Bay 8 is partially functional. Atmospheric conditions are stable. You're welcome to dock. Berthing rates are... I paused. Whatever seems fair. There was a brief silence on the other end. Whatever seems fair, the pilot said. I'm still working out the pricing structure, I said. Another pause. Then, I'll take Bay 7. Thank you. She docked 40 minutes later. Her name was Drea. She was small, gray-skinned, large-eyed, and had been running this supply corridor for 12 years. She said she had heard stories about Kethvaran from older pilots, that it had been the great station once, the hub of the whole sector, the place where every route eventually crossed. She had never expected to actually dock here. She paid me 100 credits and called it fair. I thought that was probably more than I should have charged for a partially repaired docking bay, but she insisted. She left the next morning. I waved her off from the bay entrance. Sevrith Khan appeared behind me as the merchant ship's running lights faded into the dark. You just accepted a commercial docking fee, she said. She offered, I said. You are operating Kethvaran as a functioning station. I am operating Kethvaran as a very partially functioning station, I said. About 12% of the bays are back online. It's hardly a commercial enterprise. It will be, she said. Her voice was not accusatory. It was something else. Almost. Something I would have said was admiration if I had thought that was possible. Probably, I said. The High Council will not accept this, she said. A human independently reactivating Kethvaran, accepting commercial traffic. This will accelerate their response. What will their response be? She was quiet for a moment. When she answered, her voice was careful. Lord Cathven, she said. He is the head of the noble house that originally enacted the isolation seal 309 years ago. He is the reason the dispute was never resolved. He is very old, very powerful, and he does not accept outcomes he did not design. She paused. He will come here himself, and he will invoke the right of reclamation. What is the right of reclamation? An ancient Voth law, she said. It predates the Galactic Trade Council by 2,000 years. Under the right, a Voth noble may claim any asset they can demonstrate their house, had primary construction or ceremonial claim over, regardless of any subsequent legal transfer. It supersedes GTC law. It supersedes most interspecies agreements. She looked at me. There is only one way to contest it. Of course there is, I said. A trial by the gathering, she said. A formal assembly of all the original stakeholders of the claimed asset. In this case, all 17 founding species of the Carrion Convergence would need to convene and vote on whether the right should be upheld. She paused. They have not spoken to each other in 300 years. Several of them are believed to be in active territorial disputes. 2 of them have not attended any interspecies forum since the seal. The logistics of assembling them. 2 weeks? I said. She stopped. You would have to contact and secure the agreement of 17 separate civilizations, she said. With no diplomatic credentials, no staff, no. 2 weeks? I said again. She looked at me for a long moment. He will give you 2 weeks, she said finally. That is the minimum period required by the right, before a reclamation claim can be finalized. Then I have 2 weeks, I said. Elliot, she said. It was the first time she had used my name. It is not possible. I looked out at the stars through the open docking bay. I spent 11 years coordinating freight shipments across 12 star systems, I said. I've tracked down missing cargo containers in the middle of active meteor fields. I've rerouted entire supply chains in 72 hours because a customs dispute closed a transit corridor. I've argued with port authorities on 9 different planets and won 8 of those arguments. I paused. And I have an unfair advantage. What advantage? She asked. I turned to look at her. I don't know yet that it can't be done, I said, so I haven't talked myself out of trying. She looked at me for a long time. Something moved behind the black of her compound eyes, complex and unreadable and large. I will send you the contact frequencies for the Voth Diplomatic Archive, she said quietly. It contains the last known communication channels for all 17 founding species. Thank you, I said. I am not helping you, she said, and walked away. I looked at her retreating form, the high straight spine, the precise movement of the long limbs, and thought that she absolutely was. I went inside and made coffee. I had a lot of calls to make. The first 3 contact attempts failed, not because the frequencies were wrong. They were right. But the first species I tried to reach, the Yeth, had not responded to any external communication in 40 years. Their signals were on automated redirect. The second, the Korathi, had an active diplomatic office that responded immediately and then transferred me through 7 layers of bureaucracy before disconnecting the call. The third, the Drelvan High Trade Authority, told me they would add my inquiry to the diplomatic queue and that the expected response time was 3 to 6 months. I had 2 weeks. I went back to the Voth archive and looked harder. The archive was remarkable. Severith Khan had given me access without explanation, just sent the decryption key with a brief message that said only, for reference purposes. Inside the archive was 309 years of meticulous record-keeping, contact logs, diplomatic incident records, trade manifests, ship registries, the kind of institutional memory that a civilization builds when it takes very seriously the business of knowing where everything and everyone is. I used the ship registry. Every ship that had ever docked at Kethvaran was listed, including its captain, its operating company, and its home port. The most recent entries were 300 years old. But companies and trade guilds lasted longer than individual ships, and some of the trade guilds listed were still operating. I knew their names from my years in freight logistics, because the galaxy was old and successful trade networks tended to survive. I started calling the trade guilds. A Yeth guild called the Meridian Carriers had 300-year-old docking records at Keth Varan. They were still operating. I had actually shipped cargo on their vessels twice during my years at Halcourt. I reached their routing coordinator, a sharp-voiced Yeth named Osiv, and explained the situation. There was a long pause when I told him what station I was calling from. Keth Varan, he said, very slowly. You're at Keth Varan. I own it, technically, I said. You are a human, and you own Keth Varan. The receipt is valid, I said. Another pause. What do you need? He asked. I need a representative of the Yeth at this station in 12 days, I said. Someone with the authority to participate in a formal gathering. I need them to vote on whether a Voth noble can claim this station under the right of reclamation. There was a very long silence. Hold on, Osiv said. He put me on hold for 22 minutes. When he came back, his voice was different, more formal, more careful. I am going to escalate this to the Yeth Trade Council, he said. I cannot promise an answer today, but I will tell you this. The station went dark the same year my grandfather's grandfather made his last run through the expanse. Every Yeth pilot since then has grown up hearing about what Keth Varan was. If there is a possibility of the gathering reconvening, there will be interest. He paused. Do not expect it to be easy, but do not give up on us. Understood, I said. Thank you. Do not thank me. Just keep the lights on. I moved on to the next species on my list. The Korathi were harder. Their bureaucracy was not obstruction for its own sake. It was a system designed to protect the Korathi from making decisions quickly, because in their cultural history, quick decisions had twice ended in wars. I respected the principle while finding the implementation deeply frustrating. I worked through 3 departments over 2 days before I reached someone at the Korathi diplomatic office who had the authority to listen to what I was saying. Her name was Allah, and she was, as far as I could tell from the video feed, roughly equivalent to a mid-level secretary. But she was a mid-level secretary who understood what I was asking and why it mattered. The convergence, she said, when I had explained. Her voice was quiet. The Korathi were small beings, delicate-featured, four-armed, with a greenish iridescence to their skin that shifted with their emotional state. Ayla's skin was cycling between pale gold and faint blue. We taught our children about the convergence, in school, as history, as something that was over. It doesn't have to be, I said. She looked at me through the screen. Her skin settled on warm gold. I will take this to the Director of Interspecies Affairs, she said. I will advocate for a representative to be sent. She paused. May I ask, why do you want to keep the station? You are one human. This place is enormous. Why not sell it back to the Voth? Because I paid for it, I said, and because someone should keep it. That is not a very grand reason, she said. No, I said, but it's honest. She sent a Korathi representative request to her director within the hour. I did not know for 2 more days whether it would be approved, but it felt like progress. I slept 4 hours a night for the entire 2 weeks. The rest of the time I was on the communicator, working through the archive, cross-referencing trade manifests with current operator databases, finding the threads that connected the present to what Keth Varan had been. 7 of the 17 species I reached on the first or second attempt. 4 more came through the Trade Guild network. It turned out that memories of the convergence ran deep in the commercial culture of the sector, passed down through generations of merchants and pilots who had heard their grandparents describe what the expanse had been like when all routes eventually led to Keth Varan. The remaining 6 were harder. Sevrith Khan found me on the 8th day slumped over the communications panel in the control room, asleep with my face on the desk. She stood there for a moment and then set a cup of coffee, already made, already the right temperature, beside my head. I woke up to the smell of it. The Telhari have confirmed, she said, without looking at me. She was standing at the window, looking out at the expanse. Their trade elder will attend. He is 800 years old and has not left his home system in 60 years, but he has confirmed attendance. A pause. Apparently he remembers the last gathering. He said he has been waiting for this since the day the seal went up. I sat up, picked up the coffee. How did you know about the Telhari? I asked. I made some calls, she said, still looking out the window, for reference purposes. Of course, I said. You are still too short, she said. I know, I said. The Avathi and the Drelvan High Council. The Avathi haven't responded. The Drelvan. I paused. The Drelvan are nervous, Sevrith Khan said quietly. They have always been nervous about the Vath. It was a Drelvan auctioneer who sold you this station. She turned from the window. He was nervous because he knew the Vath would be angry. But the Galactic Trade Council required him to conduct the auction. Would the Vath have actually been angry at the auctioneer? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. He was following the law. The Vath are angry at the situation, not at him. But the Drelvan do not always trust that distinction. She paused. I will send a message to the Drelvan High Trade Authority, on Vath letterhead, stating that the Vath Reclamation Authority has no objection to Drelvan representation at the gathering. You'd do that? I said. The Drelvan built the secondary docking ring, she said. They have as much right to be here as anyone. She paused again. And if the gathering does not happen, Lord Koth-Ven takes the station, and it goes dark again, for another 300 years, or longer. Her voice was flat and controlled. I have stood in the council chamber. I have sat in my house's seat, the seat that my ancestor first sat in when the Vath joined the Convergence. I do not want to be the commander who let it go dark again. I looked at her. Thank you, I said. She did not respond to that. She walked toward the door. The Avathi, she said, without turning. They are isolationist, proud. They respond poorly to requests, and reasonably well to records. Find their original contribution to the Convergence Charter in the archive. Send them a copy. Remind them of what they agreed to build. She left. I pulled up the archive and started searching. She was right. The Avathi were listed as one of the original architects of the Convergence Charter, not a participant but a designer. They had contributed to the foundational legal framework of the entire Convergence, the documents that defined what the gathering was and how it worked. Their script on the walls was one of the oldest, the architectural base language beneath the others. I found the Avathi contribution to the Convergence Charter. It was 460 years old. I sent it to the last known Avathi diplomatic frequency with a single message attached. You helped design this place. Someone is trying to close it permanently. I thought you should know. I got a response in 6 hours. It was short. We will send a representative. Do not let anyone close that station. On the 12th day, all 17 species had confirmed. Lord Koth-Ven arrived on the 13th. I saw the ship on the scanner before he announced himself. Not as large as the sovereign vessel Ankara, but older, with a different geometry, something in the design that felt like it came from an earlier era of Vath engineering. It docked at the central bay with the deliberate slowness of someone making a point about their own authority. Lord Koth-Ven was old. Even by Vath standards, I could tell. The armor he wore was ceremonial in a way that Sevrith Khan's was not, heavier and more symbolic, and he moved with the slightly careful quality of someone who had been moving this way for a very long time. His compound eyes were deep amber, and they moved over the restored corridor lighting, the polished floor, the active power systems with an expression that I could not read, but that made something tighten in the back of my neck. He stopped in front of me. He was 3.5 meters tall. I am 1.8. You are Elliot Varn, he said. Not a question. I am, I said. You have done something foolish, he said, and something impressive. I am not sure which one I am more interested in. He looked around the corridor. You have restored light to this place. The wiring was mostly intact, I said. It just needed attention. You speak as though you repaired a broken lamp, he said. This is Keth Varan. I know what it is, I said. That's why I fixed the wiring. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, You have assembled the gathering. I have, I said. I did not think that was possible. I noticed, I said. Is that why you gave me only 2 weeks? Yes, he said, without any attempt to deny it. I expected you to fail. I expected to invoke the right and finalize the reclamation within the minimum period. Instead, you have made this. He paused, looking around at the lit corridor, the operating systems, the faint hum of the station, doing what it was built to do. Necessary. I don't want to fight, I said. I want a resolution. Then you will have the gathering, he said, and you will stand before 17 civilizations and make your case. And you will lose. Maybe, I said. But you'll have to let the 17 civilizations decide that. He looked at me for one more long moment. You are not what I expected a human to be, he said. Few of us are, I said. He walked past me toward the central hub, and I watched him go, and then I went to make coffee because tomorrow was going to be the strangest day of my life. I wore the least wrinkled shirt I owned. That was the entirety of my preparation for standing before 17 civilizations. Severith Khan had suggested I acquire formal attire. I had pointed out that the formal attire of Earth would be meaningless to the assembled species, and that substance mattered more than aesthetics, and she had looked at me with the expression I had come to recognize as her equivalent of a sigh, and had dropped the subject. The council chamber was full. I stood at the entrance and looked at it for a moment before walking in. Every seat was occupied for the first time in 300 years. 17 different beings, in 17 different seats, each shaped for a body different from the others, and around the circle, 17 different light sources caught the dome and scattered it back in 17 different qualities of reflected color. The stars turned slowly above the transparent dome. The carved script on the walls of the chamber glowed with bioluminescent light in all 6 scripts. All 17, I realized, looking more carefully, because the chamber walls had all of them, layered and interwoven, the record of 400 years of decisions made in this room by these seats' predecessors. I walked in. Nobody spoke as I crossed to the center of the circle, the empty floor. I stood there, under the dome, under the stars, with 17 civilizations arranged around me, and for a moment, the silence was so complete and so large that I could hear my own heartbeat. Lord Kothven sat in the Voth seat. He did not look at me. He was looking at the walls. Severith Khan stood at the edge of the room, outside the circle of seats. She was not sitting. She held no seat in this gathering. She stood very still, and she was watching me. The Telhari elder, 800 years old, small and pale and still, in a seat that was barely larger than an armchair while the Voth seat next to him was 3 times his height, spoke first. By the Convergence Charter, he said, and his voice was thin but clear, the voice of someone who had learned long ago how to project without volume. This gathering is convened. One Elliot Varn, registered operator, Sol System, has invoked the right of gathering under Article 7 of the Convergence Charter, which specifies that any holder of a confirmed interest in Keth Varan may request that a disputed claim be settled by joint assembly rather than by the law of any single civilization. He paused. We are here. Speak. I looked around the circle. I had spent 2 weeks thinking about what to say. I had written notes and deleted them. I had practiced speeches in my small room and discarded them. I had almost prepared something impressive about diplomacy and history and the importance of peace. In the end, I said what I actually thought. I bought this station because I wanted somewhere quiet, I said. I was tired, and I had nowhere to go, and this was the only place in the auction that no one else wanted. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know any of you existed, or that any of this existed, or that there was a 300-year dispute attached to the property. I paused. I found out what this station was because Commander Severith Khan came aboard and told me. And the more she told me, the more I understood that I had accidentally bought something that used to matter to an enormous number of people, and that had been empty for 3 centuries because of a disagreement between 2 houses of one species. Lord Kothven's posture shifted slightly. I kept going. I'm not a diplomat. I'm a freight logistics engineer, from a planet most of you have probably never visited. I have no political authority, no species to represent, no ancient claim to this station. What I have is a legal purchase receipt and 2 weeks of work repairing what could be repaired. I looked around the circle. But here's what I want to say to you. Not to the gathering as a legal body, just to you, as the representatives of the civilizations that built this place. The silence was total. What did this station mean to you? Nobody answered for a moment. Then the Karathi representative, Ayla, who had been promoted to attend, I was told, said, very quietly, it meant that there was a place where disputes ended, that no matter how bad things got between us, there was somewhere we could go and sit in the same room and remember that we had agreed, once, to try. For the Yeth, Asev said from across the circle, he had come himself, as the guild representative, it meant that every route in the expanse eventually connected to something central, that none of us was operating alone. The Telhari elder said, it meant that an old being like me could sit in a room with 700 years of history and know that the things we had built together still stood. One by one, around the circle they spoke. Not all of them, but enough. The Avathi representative, young, precise, with the deliberate speech of someone translating carefully into a shared language, said, "We designed the legal framework that this station ran on. We wanted to build something that would outlast politics. We thought we had." A pause. Then the politics won anyway. I waited until the room was quiet again. "It's still here," I said. "The station didn't fall apart. The agreements you carved into these walls are still there. The framework you built is still intact. 300 years of nobody using it, and it still works." I paused. I fixed the lights. I got the docking bays running. I repaired the atmospheric systems. But I didn't build anything. You built it. Your predecessors built it. And they built it so well that one human with a toolkit and a coffee maker could bring it back in 2 weeks. I looked at Lord Cathven. "I don't want to own a contested heritage site. I don't want to be in the middle of a 300-year political dispute. I came here for somewhere quiet." A breath of something moved through the chamber. Not quite laughter. Something older than laughter. "But I also can't hand this station back to a situation that will lock it up again," I said, "because that would be a waste. And I have a very strong reaction to waste." Lord Cathven spoke then, for the first time. His voice was careful. "What are you proposing?" "I don't know enough about interspecies law to propose anything formal," I said. "But here's what seems reasonable to me. The Galactic Trade Council says I own it. You say the Voth own it. 17 civilizations contributed to building it. None of those things are wrong. They're all just different pieces of the same problem." I paused. "So maybe the answer isn't who owns it. Maybe the answer is what we do with it." The Telhari elder made a sound. It took me a moment to realize it was a laugh. A very old, very tired, very genuine laugh. 400 years of meetings in this room," he said, "and you are the first to suggest that the ownership question might be less important than the function question." "I'm an engineer," I said. "We focus on what the thing does." Another breath through the room. Longer this time. Lord Cathven was looking at the walls. At the 17 scripts carved into the stone, glowing in the dome light. He was very still. "My ancestor placed the isolation seal," he said, finally, "because he believed the Voth's honor required it. Because he could not allow the station to operate under conditions he considered dishonorable." He paused. He was wrong to seal it. He was right to be proud of what it was. He looked at me. "The Voth built this station's central hub. We were first to propose the convergence. We contributed more than any other single species to its construction." He paused again. "And we destroyed it with our own disagreements." Nobody said anything. "I withdraw the right of reclamation," he said. The sound that went through the chamber was not words. It was something that 17 species, with 17 different auditory systems, apparently all understood the same way. Relief. "On one condition," Lord Cathven said. He looked at me. "The human keeps his receipt. He keeps whatever legal ownership the Galactic Trade Council insists on assigning. But the station belongs to the Convergence, to all of us. And he paused, and something in his expression, which I had spent 3 days learning to read slightly, was careful and deliberate. He remains." "As what?" I asked. "As station keeper," he said. "A title that has never been held by a non-Voth. A title that the Voth have never offered to any other civilization." He paused. "A title that we offer now because you are the only being in 3 centuries who cared enough about this place to fix the lights." I stood in the center of the circle under the dome full of stars. "I wanted somewhere quiet," I said. "Yes," the Telhari elder said. "And instead you have this." A pause. "We know. We are sorry. Please take the title anyway." The sound in the chamber was definitely laughter now. I looked at Severith Khan at the edge of the room. She had not moved. Her compound eyes were steady on me. Her posture was perfectly controlled. The expression on her angular face was the one I had seen once before, in Docking Bay 7, when she had touched the wall of the first bay her ancestors had used, 470 years ago. I looked up at the stars through the dome. "All right," I said. "I'll take the title." Months passed. Real months. Galactic standard. Each one longer than an Earth month by about 12 days, and I was slowly getting used to the calendar. The station filled up faster than I had expected. Not immediately. The first 3 months were slow. The traffic building gradually as word spread through the old convergence networks and the new ones that Keth Varan was operational again. A Yeth trade delegation came first, then a Korathi scientific vessel, looking to resupply on a deep space mapping run. Then a pair of Drelvan cargo haulers who docked with the slightly dazed air of people who had been told something impossible was true and had come to see for themselves. I hired staff by the 4th month. I had to. One human could not run a Class 7 orbital complex alone, even a partially operational one. My first hire was a young Drelvan named Fethi, who showed up one morning having hitchhiked on a cargo vessel from 3 systems away, specifically because she had heard that Keth Varan was looking for technicians, and she had spent her entire educational career studying the station's original engineering schematics as a historical curiosity, and wanted to see it in person. She was 22 years old, and knew more about the station's original design than I had learned in 3 months of living in it. I promoted her to chief engineer within 6 weeks, and gave myself a different title, head of operations, which basically meant I was the one who talked to incoming ships, mediated disputes, managed the docking schedule, and drank enormous quantities of coffee. Severth Khan stayed. She did not announce that she was staying. She did not formally request permission to maintain a Voth presence on the station. She simply did not leave. The sovereign vessel Ankara departed. The fleet had other responsibilities, other assignments, but Severth Khan remained with a small support team, ostensibly to oversee the Voth's interests in the station's operation. In practice, she spent a great deal of time in the council chamber, reading the walls, and a comparable amount of time in the small room I used as an office, sitting across from me and drinking coffee. She was on her 4th cup of the day, when the official Keth Varan Accord documents arrived from the Galactic Trade Council for final signature. I read through them at my desk while she sat in the chair across from me, with her long legs folded at an angle that looked deeply uncomfortable, but that she assured me was perfectly natural for Voth joint geometry. The Accord formalized everything the gathering had agreed. Joint stewardship by all 17 founding civilizations, funding contributions from each member species, restoration of the original convergence schedule, a full council session every 10 years, plus standing committees for trade, dispute resolution, and cultural exchange. Keth Varan's official classification was changed from abandoned deep space asset to active interspecies heritage and commerce hub. And at the bottom, under the operational authority section, in clear legal language, in all 17 convergence scripts, Station Keeper, Elliot Varn, Sol System Registry, tenure indefinite, subject to renewal by unanimous gathering vote, every 50 galactic standard years. I stared at that line for a moment. 50 years, I said. The Telhari elder suggested it, Severth Khan said, without looking up from the mug she was holding. He said he intended to vote for your renewal personally, and wanted enough time between votes to feel the suspense. He's 800 years old. He is expecting to reach 1,000, she said. He told me he has become interested in the concept of optimism. I signed the accord. That night I sat in my small room, the first room I had cleaned, the one with the circular viewport, and wrote in my journal. The journal had started as a log for maintenance records, the kind of thing an engineer keeps automatically, and had gradually become something else entirely. I was not sure what to call it. A record, a map of how I had gotten from a fueling depot 3 systems away to here. Outside, the station was alive. I could feel it. Not just hear it, but feel it. The way you can feel a building that has people in it differently from the way you feel an empty one. There were 43 ships docked tonight. Beings from 11 different species were sleeping in the residential ring corridors, which Fethi and her team had restored to full atmospheric function last week. The commercial ring was operational on 6 bays out of 23, with more coming online as the restoration work progressed. The council chamber dome had been cleaned. A team of Avathi conservation specialists had arrived 3 weeks ago, spent 48 hours doing something very careful and very precise to the dome material, and left it so clear that at night you could see stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. In the hallway outside my door, I could hear Severth Khan's footsteps, that low resonant tone against the floor, moving past on her evening circuit of the station. She did not knock. She had learned that I needed the small hours to be quiet, but she always walked this corridor at this time, and I had learned that the sound of it, that steady, resonant beat against the station floor, was a version of the quiet I had come here looking for. Different from what I had imagined. Better than what I had imagined. I wrote in the journal, I came out here for silence. Instead, I got 17 civilizations arguing in my hallways, a 4-meter alien with a caffeine habit, a 22-year-old chief engineer who knows my own station better than I do, an 800-year-old Telhari elder who calls me once a week to discuss his renewed interest in optimism, and a title that does not translate into any human language. The silence I wanted is gone. I paused, looked out the viewport at the stars, the carrion expanse, wide and deep and old, full of roots that all eventually led back here now. But I think I might have found something I needed more. I closed the journal. Sevrith Khan's footsteps had stopped. I heard her pause in the corridor, then her voice, slightly muffled through the door. Your scanner alert fired, she said. New vessel inbound. It appears to be a human ship. I stood up. A human ship? I said. Earth Registry, she said. Commercial survey class. They are requesting docking permission and asking whether the station's coffee supply is operational. I stared at the door for a moment. Then I started to laugh. It was not a small laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and surprised, the kind you have not had in so long that it almost catches you off guard. Bay 7 is open, I said. Tell them yes. A pause from the corridor. You should know, Sevrith Khan said, with the careful tone of someone delivering news they suspect will be complicated, that there appear to be 4 additional human vessels on approach behind the first one. Of course there are, I said. And a Drelvan convoy. Naturally. And what appears to be a Yeth racing transport, which I have no explanation for. I picked up my jacket from the shelf, picked up my mug, looked out the viewport at the stars, at the faint, moving lights of incoming ships, more of them every week, all finding their way back to the station at the center of everything. I'll be right there, I said. I walked out to meet them,